Vikram Seth, welcome to the show.
Thank
You've done many surprising things in your career, including writing a libretto when people were expecting a follow-up to A Suitable Boy, which we'll talk about. But of all the things you've done, this may be the most surprising. What made you do a translation of the Hanuman Chalisa?
Well, it falls into two parts. What made me do the translation and what
Yeah.
made me decide to publish it?
Okay, so let's
Because
do the first part. Why did you do the translation?
I did the translation about 10 years ago, and I'm not quite sure what the impulse was. I've always loved the Hanuman Chalisa. And particularly since one of my characters in Suitable
Bhaskar.
Boy,
Yes,
Bhaskar,
absolutely, yeah.
the young 9-year-old, I
Yeah.
think he was a mathematician who loved playing the part of
Hanuman in the plays
a
and
soldier
all.
in the
Yes,
Vanar
that's
Sena
right.
in the Ram Leela in Brahmpur. So I felt I should get to know more of the background of his family. So that was one of the impulses. And I did actually read it publicly in the Patna Literary Festival about 10 years ago when I went there with
You
my
read your
late mother.
translation.
I read 5 couplets, chopais, and then 5, and thus did a kind of 8 by ricochet.
Sorry, it's just a slightly silly question, but
Sure.
the original is nearly always chanted. So was your version also chanted?
Yes, and
Yes,
you'll
that's
see
the
from
thing.
the fact
Yeah,
that the rhythm that I've used for the English translation
yeah.
is a close-ish match to the chand, the weight, the prosody of the Hindi version, the Awadhi version.
That's difficult, no?
Well, it put certain constraints
Yeah.
on me. Like, for example, Jai Hanuman, Gyan Gun Sagar, Hail Hanuman, Great Wisdom's Ocean. You know, that sort of
Yeah.
thing. English is not a trochaic language.
Right.
English is more iambic. So it goes ta-tum, 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 not tumty, tumty.
Right.
And I wanted the tumty, tumty to get that sense of intoxication.
Of that,
Yeah.
Which was really the point of the Chalisa and when people used to chant it.
Indeed. I mean, it's not only, exactly, it's sung,
Yeah.
it's japod or chanted, it's read.
Yeah.
But after that, I felt it was a private translation, and I, to some extent, I thought to myself, no, Hinduism has been so much preempted by forces which use it to attack and demean other people
Yeah.
that I didn't really necessarily want to publish it. But then people said to me, look, it's a question of sharing it
Yeah.
with other people. My reaction first was, a translation is a very, very pale copy of Tulsidas's original. And people said, well, at least it's a window. At least
But
it's...
your books have been translated into so many languages.
They have.
So,
But poetry, anyway, and I've been the recipient, the beneficiary of translations. For example, I don't think we would be sitting here today if I hadn't happened to read Pushkin's Eugene Onegin, a great novel in verse, when I was doing my economics PhD. And I got completely blown off course and then wrote The Golden Gate, which uses the same form, rhyme, meter, and the fact that it's a novel in verse. So, since I'm a beneficiary of translation, it would be a bit kind of asymmetric, let's put it that way, of me, to say, no, I'm not going to publish it because I'll be afraid that people will say, well, you know, how does it compare to the original? It's just a window. It's a question of access.
That's one aspect of it.
True.
How people would react to the translation. The other aspect, given the climate we live in, was that you were making some kind of political statement by publishing the Hanuman Chalisa.
No. In fact, I tried to avoid it. I was going to publish it on Hanuman Jayanti, Chet Purnima. But then I thought, look, this is just around the time of the election, and the whole thing will get caught up in all that stuff. I'd written done the translation, polished it, and written the introduction as well. I decided to publish it on or around my birthday instead.
Okay.
So, but the 2 paragraphs, and with your permission, I'd like to read those 2 paragraphs.
Please do.
It's not hugely political, but it makes a point.
But those paragraphs are very striking because they come towards the end of an introduction, which is not political at all. So that's why.
But I do at the very beginning mention Bhaskar.
You do.
Well, then maybe in a introduction, the first 2 paragraphs and the last 2.
Yes, let's read.
The first 2 read as follows. The Hanuman Chalisa by Tulsidas is one of the best known and best loved poems in the world. Tens of millions of people can recite it by heart and chant it daily, as well as in times singularly joyful or sorrowful, or when they feel the need for support or courage. So too did Bhaskar, the precocious young mathematician in A Suitable Boy, who, as a child, loved to participate in the annual Ram Leela in Brahmpur in his role as a monkey warrior. I did this translation more than 10 years ago as a labor of love, but have only recently been persuaded to publish it. I hope that it will enable the Hanuman Chalisa to be enjoyed by those who cannot understand the Hindi or Awadhi of the 16th century. Then I'll skip all the pages,
Yeah.
go right to the end. I dedicate this translation to Bhaskar, who learnt the poem before he was 5, but who spent his 50s fighting the chauvinism and intolerance to which this and many other well-beloved religious texts and rituals have been put. Nothing could be further from the humanity and inclusivity of the best of Hinduism than the self-aggrandizement and willful cruelty of those who use the religion in which, in the lottery of life, they happen to be born, in order to attack or demean others. May the Hanuman Chalisa continue to spread joy, expand imagination, and give strength and solace to its many past and future readers. That's the book ends of a
Yeah.
short introduction. I didn't want a lot of notes like who was Sugriv, who was Vibhishan, what exactly is the chants. I just wanted to leave the introduction very short, but just a personal view of this.
But were you, when people will ask nearly always, when you were translating the Hanuman Chalisa, were you doing it as a poet or was it partly as a believer as well?
That's far too private a question
sure.
for a public audience. But whether it's Vishwas or Ardha-Vishwas or Andha-Vishwas or just a love of something as a poem, that's, to my mind, secondary to my conception of the translation.
Yeah.
For example, when I'm in England, I at one said lived in a house belonging to a poet called George Herbert,
Okay.
who is a religious poet from around the time of Shakespeare, just a little, maybe 15 years after him. And he's a religious poet. And this house is just opposite a small church. Now, I love Herbert's poetry, but it doesn't mean necessarily that I am an Anglican
Sure.
by belief. On the other hand, I am a Hindu by birth.
Yeah.
So it's a different kind of understanding.
But this
of
is
things.
an expressly religious text.
It is
like part of
expressly religious.
Tulsi Ramchandra.
True, but it doesn't mean that you can't enjoy Bach's Matthew Passion if you're a Jew.
Yeah, fair enough.
Right? So, religious texts are also deeply cultural texts.
Yeah.
And Hinduism allows you to be a pantheist, a tritheist or tertheist,
Yeah.
or a monotheist, or an agnostic or an atheist.
That's one of the great things.
That's
about
one of
it.
the great things about religion. The other thing is, it's not confined to human beings and anthropomorphic gods. Hanumanji is not. Hanumanji is actually a monkey, isn't he?
Yeah.
And Ganeshji is half an elephant, and Narasimha is half a lion, and our avatars of Vishnu are. And besides that, all the Vahans have a personality of their own. So, and then rivers and trees and stones. It's in that sense, an inclusive religion, and that is why I feel the uses to which recently, in the name of an aggrandizement of this particular religion in this particular geography, has been put is wrong.
Yes, and unlike everything that's happened with Hinduism in the past, where it was always a religion that was tolerant, inclusive, not a religion that was militant, that was used to discriminate against other people. It's not part of the Hindu tradition.
Yeah. I wouldn't say always. There are periods in Hindu history where there have been bitter fights between, say, Shaivites and Vaishnavites. Or
or Buddhists.
Or Buddhists.
Buddhist is the one area where you can say that.
You might say it, but then look at what's happening in Myanmar. Or look at what's happening. I mean, sorry, you're talking about Hinduism and Buddhism.
I'm talking about Hinduism and Buddhism.
Yeah, versus Hinduism. But Buddhism, a very basically tolerant religion in the best of Hinduism. Sri Lanka or Myanmar are cases where, I think religion is an institution in a sense, a very rich cultural institution, but what breathes life into it is the personnel who inhabit the religion. People often say, well, look at the golden age of Islamic culture.
Yeah.
Before the Crusades came and made it narrower and more withdrawn and indrawn. True, but you can't just say Islam is a peaceful culture because the word Islam. You can't. You can't say Hinduism is a peaceful culture or Christianity is not at all. Though Christ is the Prince of Peace, but how many sins are
People have
committed in the
died in
name?
the name of
Exactly.
Christ, yeah.
So I would not give Hinduism too much credit for
Alright.
that. I would say that the best of Hinduism has been very inclusive. The best of Hinduism has been like that.
But I don't know if you're aware of this, but you talk about one kind of Hanumanji, but over the last 5-6 years, there's been an icon, what is called the angry Hanuman, and it's a lot of drawing, and it's become like a symbol for a kind of Hindutva anger, a sense that Hindus have been discriminated against for so long, and we won't take it. So that's a very different Hanumanji from yours.
True. It's not, in a sense, historically, you might say that not the cult, but the enthusiastic worship of Hanumanji began partly as a result of this, not angry Hanuman, but protect Hanuman, which came around 1000 of the standard era, when Hindus began to feel as aggressive as they had been towards Buddhism, they now felt defensive against Islam.
Yeah.
So the angry Hanuman has also always been there. After all, Hanuman is not just a Sukshma Roop and
he's a warrior.
also a Vikata Roop Dhare Lanka Jarawa, and that aspect of Hanuman has always been there. So, but what is nice about Hanuman is that he is not there just for himself. He's there for someone else. He doesn't have the kind of arrogance and pride with which his banner is being raised against people who, who have no relevance to his particular concerns.
Yeah. When you started translating it, did you know very much about Hanumanji, or was it a revelation for you?
No. You know all the stories. It doesn't really take Amar Chitrakatha and your Nani and Ram Leelas too. I mean, in a sense, the story of Ramayan is better known than the story of the Mahabharata because of the Ram Leela tradition in the north. But even in the Mahabharata, well, there's not much mention of Hanumanji except for his half brother Bhim. But Bhim is also Pavanasut, the son of the wind, but trying to move his tail when he tries to get past him. And then the two brothers meeting. It's a kind of bhai milap, you could say, of a different kind.
So, did Hanumanji actually mean anything to you more than just a character in a poem?
Yes, I'd say so. I mean, yes, I think so. I mean, and Ganeshji also.
Sure. There's a sense in which I think if you had done this had published it as planned before the election or whatever, people would have said, Vikram Seth, gone over to that side. He also wants to praise Hanuman, to be in with the regime, to influence people. Did that ever occur to you?
I think those 2 paragraphs that I read would have put people right on that matter.
So is that why you put them in, or were you?
No. I put them in because
you do believe that?
I mean, let me put it this way. It's a bit of a coincidence that it's being published now.
Yeah.
It was, as I said, going to be published pre-election. I thought, that's ridiculous. After the election, even if the result had come and BJP had got their 400 par kar gaye hote, I assure you it would have been published exactly as is with those paragraphs in place.
But those paragraphs which we read out and which in this context are slightly unusual when you talk about Hanumanji are actually what you've been saying for many years. Right?
I have. I mean, I remember when the Babri Masjid was torn down in 1992, that advertisement on the front page of the newspapers where it said, if you are a Hindu, read on. And it was 20 Hindus from the chief of the army staff onwards, downwards, who said, what has happened is weakening India. How can we treat our fellow citizens? Forget about whether it weakens India or not. How can we even conceive that a fellow citizen with a name beginning with a different letter, or wearing a different kind of cap, or eating a different kind of food, has any less right than we have to the nationality that we all share? It's just, not only is it inhumane, it's illogical.
When the ad appeared, when the Babri Masjid was demolished, did you ever think it would come to this, the situation we're at today?
I feared it might. I'll tell you, when I didn't think it would come. Look, there's a lot going on. This is the Babri Masjid thing was led up to by, I wouldn't say a domino structure of Mandal and then Mandir and Masjid, and then tried to win over before Devi Lal had his meeting, and then Chandrasekhar did this, and then VP Singh did that, and so on and so forth, and then Narasimha Rao sat still. All that stuff. It has also got to do with what was happening culturally at that time.
Explain
Tell
that.
everything.
TV Mahabharat
The
and Ramayan?
The TV Ramayan came before the TV Mahabharata.
Yes, it did.
Had it been the other way around, things might have been different, because the Mahabharata is a very complex book. People always have such complex motivations. You can't say this person is good purely. I mean, the whole collapse of the regime and his whole family came about because of whom? Because of Dharma, because of Yudhishthir. He created all that. So the weakness of good man, all that, in the Ramayana, okay, the weakness of a good man comes at the end when he mistreats Sita. But in the Ramcharitmanas, you don't find that.
Yeah, that's the Valmiki.
Valmiki Rama. So there's a lot of, how to say, maroroing and jugadoing and smoothing down things that goes on over the course of history.
It's also a fairly linear story, unlike the Mahabharata, which is so many complicated other characters.
I think that's very true.
It's a simpler story to understand, and you can see it in triumph of good over evil terms.
Yes, I think so. But actually, that's not entirely true. For example, there are people who worship Ravan, and Indra, well, sort of Meghnad is a common name in Bengal.
It is.
And one of the great Bengali poems, Meghnad Badh, by Michael Madhusudhan Datta, is based upon being of the devil's party, so to speak, in Milton's Paradise Lost.
I didn't know that. But there are many different Ramayans in India. There is no one text.
And not just in India, Indonesia, many different Ramayans.
And we try and simplify it. And actually, in the minds of most people, I think the TV version of the Ramayana has now become the authorized text. But that takes away the complexity of many of the stories.
Sorry, I've gone off into a thought process of my own.
I'll tell you where I was taking it from. You said that the destruction of the Babri Masjid was cultural as well, and it was preceded by many things. And one of the things you mentioned was Ramayana on TV.
Indeed. And of course, say Advani's decision to take the Rath Yatra out. Why? Because how on earth am I going to make the be in the light of other coalescing vote banks? What will I do, etc. Then Lalu's, all sorts of stuff happened.
Everybody had different motivations.
And then
which have very little to do with Lord Ram, but they had their own motivations.
Indeed.
So, when you think about Lord Ram for what he was then, and you think about what you're doing now, do you find that in some sense perhaps one has to reclaim the purity of the original text, the original characters? No?
I didn't think as far as that. Frankly,
really, it was just
I love the poem. I translated it for my own pleasure. My publisher and my aunt said to me, in whose drawing room we are sitting, because my house is such a mess, and who recites the Hanuman Chalisa twice before going to bed every night. She said, darling, why don't you share it with other people as well? I did a version which I wrote out in handwriting for her.
I've seen that. That's actually beautifully written. That's your own handwriting?
That's my handwriting. Okay. And the cover actually is also, this thing is my tutti frutti calligraphy as well. I published it as a result of that, not trying to reclaim something very grand.
So it was a limited ambition.
It was a limited thing, and but I hope that it's not limited in opening people's eyes to what a wonderful poem it is.
Yeah, that there is no doubt about it. And I read the translation yesterday. You really captured the sense of it, and the poetry part, which must be the most difficult part, you captured that.
I don't think if I had done it in prose, and I wouldn't have done it in prose.
Yeah, but there's no point doing it in prose. No, it's a chant. It's
so far, it's largely been done in prose.
Could you actually recite it when you were doing the Suitable Boy? You yourself, you can recite the Hanuman Chalisa?
Yeah, I can.
Really? Even now?
Sure, but I'm not going to.
You're not getting into the
don't embarrass me, because then I'll stumble. But if you recite any line of it, I'll probably be able to complete it and go on from there. So, okay, let's
pick one.
Well, why not just begin from the... one very interesting thing I found out was that in the Chalisa, because it's a Chalisa, it's a 40 verse chopai, that the first quarter begins with Hanuman, the second quarter begins with Lakshman, the third begins with Ram, and the fourth begins with Sita.
Okay, I don't know.
So the first one, the 11th, the 21st, and the 31st chopais are the first one is Jai Hanuman Gyana Guna Sagar, Jai Kapisati Hundu Ko Jagar, which would be translated, obviously I can't remember my translation.
Okay.
Hail Hanuman, great wisdom's ocean, the three worlds glow with your light and devotion. Then the 11th one is Lai Sajivan Lakhanjiyai Shri Raghubira Harashi Urulai. That is when he gets that plant, the mountain. So that's Lakshmanji. You brought the herb that was Lakshman's salvation. Ram pressed you close to his heart with elation. The third one is Ram Dware Tum Rakhware Hot Na Agya Bina Paisare. So outside Ram's door, it is you who stand sentry. No one without your permission gains entry. And the fourth one is Sita ji. Ashta Siddhino Nidhi Ke Data Asabaradina Janaki Mata. So there you get, how do I translate it? 4, Ashta Siddhi. 8, I have it. 9 great gifts, 8 yogic powers. Grant us the boons that Sita showers. So, this is the way in which I mean, it's very unusual to recite it that way, but at least it's interesting. It shows something of the structure of the Hanuman Chalisa.
I actually wondered about this when I read The Golden Gate, and you were not then as well known as you are now. And it's a novel. You told a story.
Sure.
And yet the verses seem to flow so naturally. And I wondered, did you really have to work at it, or is it like with some people, music comes naturally, poetry comes easily?
Robert Frost said, was it he who said? Yeah, I think so. Easy reading is damned hard writing.
Yeah.
So if you see my scrolls and scripts, you'll see how often I have to work on things. Occasionally, I'll have the great good fortune to have a poem almost descend from nowhere, like a short poem I wrote, All You Who Sleep Tonight.
Which is the title of the book as well, that collection.
That collection. 8 lines, they came like that, but then one word took me 8 months.
One word? How?
It was All You Who Sleep Tonight, far from the ones you love, no hand to left or right, and emptiness above. Know that you aren't alone. The whole world shares your tears. Some for 2 nights or 1, and some for all their years. Now the word that gave me trouble is, know that you aren't alone.
Why would that give you so much trouble?
Know that you're not alone. Okay. Know that you aren't alone. Know that you're not alone. I struggle with this. Eventually I just said, know that you aren't alone. The long sound of aren't, and it's not the negativity of not alone that I want to stress. It is almost a sigh and a feeling of meditation. To know that you're not alone is serviceable.
Yeah.
But know that you aren't alone. See, everything else came. And these two, between one and the other,
how many months to agonize over this one word?
I think I said 8 months. Something like that.
And how would you do? You'd stay awake at night and wonder?
No. Then? I'd put it down. Someone said a poem is never finished, only abandoned. Or maybe they said it about a novel. I can't remember.
True.
But whatever,
both are probably true.
Both are true. But look at Thomas Hardy. He wrote that book in time of breaking of nations. He wrote 2 stanzas, and then 30 years later, in 1917 or something, I can't remember when, he wrote the 3rd stanza, 4 lines long. So things come. I put it aside, and at various times I gungun out. I try to murmur to myself, but when finally I made the decision, I knew it was the right one.
Yeah.
And now if someone says, know that you're not alone, kaanon mein khatakta hai. It just feels wrong, because I know how much I went through.
But do you still write poetry all the time?
Yes.
Yes. How often?
That's difficult to say, but for example, lately my book, The Golden Gate, was translated to Russian about 2, 3, 4 years ago. And I was very happy because the inspiration came to me from Russia and from Pushkin. whose statue is outside the Lalit Kala Academy, you notice. So I did a little pujan to him as I went past. Um, and recently I had to write to a Russian friend of mine, my translator, because they feel so, hard done by what's going on. Of course, it's far worse for the Ukrainians, but anyone of goodwill in Russia. So I wrote a poem to him and for him in the Pushkin stanza. So that was just.
And that came naturally to you?
Yeah, I thought I'll write him a letter. Then I thought, no, why not write him a poem? It'll mean much more to him. He'll smile.
That definition you had of yourself, which is you can do many things, basically you're a poet, still stands?
Yeah.
Yeah? You see yourself as a poet.
I
Despite
do.
writing a book like A Suitable Boy, which is what you're best known for, which is like one of the great novels of the century.
But remember, I hadn't even written a short story before I wrote A Suitable Boy.
Yeah. And
I written The Golden Gate, but that's a long poem. Also.
That's different. That wasn't prose.
Yeah. Because I got caught up in the characters. And then one thing led to another. And Bhaskar pulled me into reacquainting and then my Muslim characters made me reread and relearn Urdu and Ghalib and Mir, and then I had to learn how to visit a Tawaif, though there are no Tawaifs left, and I had to learn how to sort of sow and reap in the villages.
Is this why your books take so long? Because if you're writing about somebody who's interested in Hanumanji, you will go and translate the Hanuman Chalisa. If you want a character to visit a Tawaif, you'll have to try and imagine that whole area.
Yeah, because I'm more a realist than, say, a magic realist or something like that. I wanted to be believed by people. If someone in San Francisco had said, well, your book is very popular elsewhere, but I don't believe in the Golden Gate. Or a musician had said, this is all very well, but a violinist would say this is a joke. Then I would say the book has failed. It doesn't matter how well known, how popular it is. And if people who lived in Nehru's times had said to me, this doesn't ring true.
It wouldn't. And when you started with something like The Suitable Boy, did you know where your characters would go, or would they take it over?
A little of each. It's a kind of iteration. After I'd written all 19 parts, I went back to the first part and I realized I had to completely rewrite it.
Because of what the characters had done.
Because of what had happened later and how threads just stuck out without being developed. Other things needed to have a little hint of, say, a rose petal falling during a wedding on a friend's hair. Something like that had to happen in order to...
How long did it take, the whole process?
Not that long it took about 8-10 years altogether.
Which is not that long? Which is not that long?
No, the actual writing took less. But the research, the thinking, the revising, the publishing, and then the whole business of publicity and all that. Yeah. So, and maybe a year to recover. So maybe 12 years then.
And this is a question presumably you asked all the time and you've got a collection of evasive answers. But is the same process happening with The Suitable Girl?
I suspect so, but because I'm older, it's probably taking a bit longer.
A bit longer? How long has it been?
I can't calculate. That's one of the advantages.
I said you were good at the evasive answers of that
one. One of the advantages of senility is it can be selective.
Yeah, but it's been a decade at least.
Oh yeah, I'd say so. It's been a decade, of course.
But there are you still refuse to say where you're at or how long it'll take.
Yeah, because the moment you say something, I've been caught up in that previously. I've said something, I've sold the book to a publisher, then I've had to understandably withdraw. And so now I'm not tied to anyone except to my muse. And even
you don't have a deal for the book?
None. And no
but
deal.
Wasn't there a massive advance or something at this point?
I've given it all back.
You paid it back?
I've given it back to everyone. After all, they'd invested their money in me and I hadn't produced in time. So it's fair enough for them to ask. It created various problems for me because I couldn't claw back my taxes and all that sort of stuff. But I just felt the freedom to sink back into the characters, into the world of my characters, and to feel free. And in fact, I'm writing better now than I wrote then. Than when I wrote with a kang around my neck.
With a deadline in your head or whatever. Yeah, and with money. Okay, so still no estimates of...
in my own mind there are estimates, but then I get slightly waylaid by
that,
something like that.
Do you actually look for the distractions or do they just happen? Because there have been many distractions during the writing of this book.
Well, there were many distractions in the writing of A Suitable Boy.
Which is why it took 10 years.
Possibly, but these distractions were necessary. I wrote Beastly Tales.
Yeah.
I wrote the libretto you mentioned, Ramayan and the Dolphin. I translated 3 Chinese poets.
Yeah.
And I think there were a couple of other small books which came. I think All You Sleep Tonight maybe also at that time. Yeah.
Yeah,
So they were
just after. It was published just after. Wasn't it?
See, exactly. So I really, you know better than I do. I need these timeouts or times out rather than.
And then when you return to it, is it like the example you gave of Hardy, that you can pick up exactly where you left off?
No, I've grown older. Well, sorry, in Hardy's case, he was
Yes.
almost
Yeah.
20 years old.
Yeah.
No, I can.
Yeah.
Better. I may have to do a little reculer pour mieux sauter, but I'm not quite sure that sometimes you can just take up from where you are, and sometimes your vision of it or your characters have changed their minds. They're not going to marry this person after all. I said, but I've done all this work.
That happened, yeah.
It has happened.
Without your permission, they change their minds and do different things, and you have to rearrange the book.
Yeah, it's the opposite of Ram Dware to होत ना आज्ञा बिना. Without my permission, they decide कि हम इस दिशा में जाएंगे.
So when you write these books, are these characters living creatures in your mind?
Yes,
They are.
they are. At first, they are rather fugitive and phantom, unless they're based on a specific real person. But many of the characters aren't. They're based on someone who's related to someone or something you read in a newspaper or completely out of whole cloth. But if not, then I like writing in the middle of the night, sitting on my bed under a blue duvet, if it's cold, with a hot water bottle at my feet, with one of those old style, क्या कहते हैं, जैसे कि हमारे मुनीम साहब.
But you write on a computer? How do you write?
Longhand and computer. Poetry always longhand.
Okay.
Prose quite often with the computer. I place the laptop and then I do it that way.
And there's been no more non-fiction after. Everybody gets the title wrong. It was what? From Heaven Lake. Was that the
There was one other book of non-fiction. From Heaven Lake was a book about hitchhiking across from Tibet.
I've read it. It was sort of it was a kind of travelogue without being a travelogue, if you see.
Right.
Yeah.
An Indian traveling across Tibet from China back to his hometown. But I did write a kind of family, not saga exactly, it was a memoir called Two Lives. And that was about my great uncle, who was a one-armed dentist. His right arm was blown off in the Second World War when he was with the British troops in Italy.
Okay.
And his German Jewish wife, my great aunt, Auntie Henny. So I wrote about them. Two lives. In fact, it's more die than two because I also come into it.
I haven't read it. But you're not going to write about
I'm looking for it in Usha Mami's bookshelf.
Is
there
that?
it is.
We'll find it.
You
don't want to write about your own family? Because
this is partly my own family. Because my parents come into it. This is Two Lives. So this
Okay.
is the other non-fiction book that I wrote. So those are the two.
And you wrote this when?
2005, I think it was published.
So when you were supposed to be writing A Suitable Girl, or
20 years ago, 20 saal pehle. That's amazing.
And Suitable Boy had come out, everything.
Suitable Boy was in 1993.
That's right.
This was about 20 years later. And this other one is another
Equal
20
Music
years
was when about?
Equal Music was, I
10
think,
years ago?
1999.
Oh, that early? That long ago?
Yeah, it was way back in the 20th century, as one might say.
That's right. So there's not been a novel in the 21st.
I've only written 3 novels, and one of them is a quasi-novel,
Golden Gate, yeah. But you've never thought of writing non-fiction, which is about ideas, things you believe in?
Occasionally you find a paragraph, as in this.
That's what I'm saying. So it's there, but it never actually turns out into books.
Many of my characters voice my thoughts and also voice the opposite thought.
Yeah.
Because if you have every Mahesh Kapoor, who's a liberal politician, you have an Ellen Agarwal, who is a very cutter politician, who also has a point of view which you have to understand and have to become, kind of. So, I don't like preaching. Actually, strangely enough, though I revere War and Peace, the parts I like least in War and Peace are the parts where Tolstoy starts giving you long bhashans. A novel is a novel. Don't start preaching.
And let the characters tell their story.
Let the characters tell their story. People don't like to be preached to in a novel. But why not write, say, a tract or a book of essays or something like that? I might at some stage.
It's a possibility.
It's a possibility. I've got probably enough essays to cobble together, speeches, essays. But at the moment, I'm trying to work on Girl.
You've saying that for a long time.
I would say.
Were you involved at all with the television adaptation of Suitable Boy?
I helped choose the director and
Meera Nayak,
Meera,
who was
and
a brilliant
a
director.
wonderful director, and my sister Radna was hugely involved in everything, including the selection of Lucknow, which is where Usha Mami comes from. And Lucknow is the main city where it will be filmed.
But did you like sit with Andrew Davis and say, "This is how I see it"? When he
No,
wrote
no,
the
I
script?
didn't. But Andrew Davis, who'd also done Les Miserables and War and Peace.
And One Piece, yeah,
But certainly,
and House of Cards.
that's true.
That's true.
That's true. Exactly.
Yeah.
A brilliant house of cards. So Andrew Davis is a wonderful writer and a wonderful person to be a companion. But the thing is, I didn't want to. You can't look over someone's shoulder when they're writing a script or directing. Now, what I did do was, because Andrew doesn't understand that much about
India,
India.
and that period.
So after we got it, then I helped Meera and I both got together and we made it what it eventually became. The sadness was it was originally supposed to be 10 parts, and then the BBC reduced it to 8, and then they reduced it to 6.
I have interviewed Meera, and she said one of her great regrets was
Yeah.
they couldn't have the sweep they wanted when
Yeah.
they made it, because BBC kept cutting back on the number of episodes.
And they said, well, what's good enough for Tolstoy and Hugo is good enough for you. I said, but they're not alive to complain.
So, were you happy with it, or as happy as is possible in such a film?
I think Meera did a fantastic job.
Yeah.
I thought some of the actors, I mean, well, let me just say, like, Tabu and Ishan were magic as Maan and Saida Bai, and many other actors as well. Haresh, my God, he was so dangerously like my
I
father.
was
in
about to
some
say
ways.
that, yeah, and
Acha.
that one has been personal to you.
And he's also a singer, by the way. So in the Shastri Sangeet, he and the settings, photography, and the music by the sitar. I think on the whole, I was simultaneously relieved, which is what I never expected to be. I thought someone's going to make a hash of it. Even one of my favorite directors. But that, and I would say pleasure. Though I have only seen it through once.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. And when you saw it, did you say, "Hey, this is what I wrote. These are the people I wrote about," or was it something different inspired
Well,
by you?
Meera was generous enough to let me see each part as it came along, and I did put in my inputs in certain cases. And then I was quite involved in the Hindi translation,
Sure.
the dubbing thing, because I did realize. So there I actually went through the Hindi script, word by word and line by line, with a very nice translator.
It's a difficult job getting a book like that on the screen. No, Midnight Children, they've tried, it hasn't quite worked.
I think it's immensely difficult. I think Midnight Children in some ways is even more difficult because there's
much
the
more difficult,
story and it's but Meera didn't have an easy job. Entire sublines, entire sub stories had to be removed. It's a completely different genre.
Yeah.
You cannot be too faithful to the book. You cannot be too faithless to the book.
Well, John le Carre said about the film of Tinker Tailor that I don't see it as being a film of my book, because what you can do in cinema is take the whole cow and reduce it to an OXO cube. If the OXO cube has a flavor, that's all right.
But there is one film made from Le Carre's books, which I think is a masterpiece.
Which one?
The black and white version of The Spy Who Came In From the Cold.
Yes.
I mean, with Richard Burton and is it Claire Bloom? I can't remember.
Claire Bloom, Richard Burton.
I just wow, and then the German actors so good. I thought it was just
But that's one of the great spy films, because it's spy film,
But
but
you
not
see-
a James Bond like thriller of all time.
they could have ruined it in the movie,
Yeah,
in
but
the
they
making of the movie, especially filling it with stars.
Yeah.
But it was so well done.
But even Richard Burton as Alec Leamas, who's a sort of
Exactly.
defeated figure, was so convincing despite being the
Absolutely.
big star.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, enough about action. What next for Vikram Seth?
Sleep.
Yeah.
A little singing. Actually, what I'm going to do is just recover from the Hanuman Chalisa and all
But
that.
you wrote this 10 years ago, yeah? What do you need to
It's-
recover from?
Because I'll tell you, there's a lot of work that went into
The final version?
polishing it, making sure it's all right. Even the production, the writing, the calligraphy, doing everything. You know, whether it should be 90 GSM papers, kitni how translate, how translucent is it? It's been quite a thing, and now it's come out and looks rather beautiful.
It looks lovely.
Very holdable.
It's wonderful book.
Yeah, and
So-
and also publicity, which
You haven't done a lot.
I've done enough.
Yeah, compared to what you did for Suitable Boy, for instance.
Yeah, now I've
nothing.
become very intolerant in my.
No, you were pretty difficult even then, but it's worse now, I think.
Yes, I guess that's right.
But another book or another distraction, or we wait for Girl?
See, if I could predict what I was
Yeah.
going to do, I would simply tell you.
So you're like one of the characters in your books that have lives of their own and you don't quite know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I try to have a little more control over myself than I realize I must relinquish to my characters. But I don't have complete control over myself either. And time is getting short. I'm not young anymore. So
You're not that old.
Come on.
Come on.
But anyway, like it's again the year of the dragon, which has come around 6 times already, 7 if you include when I was born. So I know my energy is not quite what it was. I better get cracking.
But something has always struck me about you, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, in all the years I've known you, is that you seem to have lived things by your own rules. You've never seemed to have had any constraints or considerations. Many people who do what you do would write a couple of quickies just to make money. Nobody would ever return in advance. Many people would be frightened of deadlines and would turn something out. You don't do any of that.
Well, remember, I was an economist. I had a career.
In fact, you were doing a PhD, right?
I was. And that's right. I read philosophy, politics, and economics in England, and then I went in California.
In England.
In England, and
We don't want to say Oxford. All right.
you can say Oxford if you
right,
like. Okay, then in Stanford,
right.
I did economics and demography in a sense. So I follow with great interest and personal involvement. You can see my Noida's vote is 1 month old.
Okay.
That's why it's gone all the way up my नाखून. क्योंकि यहाँ तो 1 महीने पहले हमारा चुनाव यहाँ हुआ था दिल्ली के बेनिस्बत. So I think that I had a profession. I moved away from that profession into writing a novel in verse and then writing a Suitable Boy. So if I made that jump, then after that all the other jumps are comparatively minor.
So you don't, when you face...
I don't mind failing. That's the thing, that helps.
But you've never failed. That was going to be my next question. There's always been huge success in completely unrelated things. So do you think, in a sense, you would have difficulty coping with failure? Though you've answered that by saying...
I have failed and I've coped with
Where
failure.
did you fail?
If you see the manuscripts that I've written that I have not published.
Oh, really? Are there also them?
And also, like after 150 pages of working on something, you suddenly realize this is going nowhere. So you wait, because sometimes it just requires a bit of patience. Or you try to climb over the wall or batter the wall down or go around it or dig under it. Nothing happens. Then, like a good economist, you should say, these are sunk costs. Think of your opportunity costs of wasting the next year. Take a breather and do something else.
And when you return to those manuscripts, how many of them you think are unsalvageable, have been unsalvageable?
Well, I wrote a play in verse once called Lynch and Boyle, published it's set in a publishing firm called Lynch and Boyle, both with Y's. And someone wanted to put it on the stage in London, and I said, well, let me polish it, but they said, it'll take 3 or 4 months. I said, I'm writing a Suitable Boy, so no.
Well, the play still exists.
It exists.
And you'll never publish it?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Maybe हमारे चिता पे उसे भी जला दिया जाए तो अच्छा हो. But sometimes you're not the best judges of your own work. However, I looked at it about 20, 30 years later and I said, yes, it wasn't much good. I was right.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
So we don't know what's going to happen next. We know that you're going to take a rest. We know that at some stage in, we hope, the not too distant future, The Suitable Girl will be finished and published.
Yeah.
But beyond that, the world is open?
Well, beyond that, the world is okay, did you say?
No, is open to you
Is
and to
open.
every possibility that comes along?
As I say, time's winged chariot
Yeah.
is somewhere behind me, and so I'm conscious that I don't have the time to sort of indulge myself with everything I want to do. And secondly, you know, I am very concerned with what's going on in the world around me, whether it's what happened a month ago,
Yeah.
um,
By
and
that you mean?
the elections,
The elections,
and
yeah.
and the relief to some extent,
Yeah.
the concern about whether the disparate parties will manage for the next 5 years to coalesce into something. But most importantly, what will our actual polity be with regard to unemployment, poverty, and the hatred that has been spread against against our fellow Indians? How resolvable are these problems, and how quickly can they be resolved? India is so lucky. We have the Judeo-Christian tradition, we have the Hindu tradition, we have the Islamic tradition. We don't have the Sino-Japanese, but that I'm
Yes.
interested in as it happens. Which other country has,
Yeah.
and who would be so crazy as to impoverish themselves by trying to weaken or denigrate one of these great traditions?
So cautiously optimistic
Yes.
and cautiously relieved.
Oh, relieved, definitely.
Yeah.
And cautiously optimistic. But you know how it is. When one good thing happens, you think, oh, that's over. Now let me worry about the
The
real
next
thing.
bad thing.
Yeah. So as an economist, then I think, there's such structural problems in the Indian economy, and yet our great advantage of an educated or semi-educated cohort of young working people, you could say, our demographic bonus, which compared to the horribly narrowed working pyramid of China,
Yeah.
we're letting it go past year after year.
Yeah.
And this is a great economic tragedy, and it's a great tragedy of frustration in the lives of people who don't want to depend on a dole or a quasi dole or to sit around doing nothing.
And want their dignity.
They want their dignity, they want their work, they want something interesting to do. And it cannot all, productivity is important, but also you can't make false jobs. You can't just create jobs. There has to be an ease of doing business. There has to be a non-arbitrariness that someone will just land at your door, confiscate all your goods,
Yeah.
because the government that happens to hold the home ministry will do whatever they like to you. That's dangerous. And then structural problems like infrastructure. I mean, lots of good things have been done, but basically, a lot needs to be done in those areas. And of
So-
course, my number one
Yeah.
is, you could say, the orange and the green. That is very important in making our country a livable, decent, humane country again.
Last question. You feel so strongly about these issues. You speak so well. Why in God's name are you not writing about them?
In my quiet way, I do.
You do?
I've
And
told
will you publish it?
my novels, in a sense, you don't know what's going on.
One every 20 years. That's not long. Not-
No, if something really shockingly bad happens, like with 377
Yeah.
and so on, I've spoken up.
Yeah.
But short of that, let me put it this way: a writer is a writer, but he or she doesn't have a much greater right or knowledge than any ordinary educated citizen, and should not give themselves too much power in these matters.
That's a very honest, candid, and humble thing to say. Vikram, say thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you.